Imagine a crowd gathered under the grey skies of London in the year 1305. The air is thick with tension, and the echo of church bells rolls like thunder across the city. Thousands of men, women, and children press together, craning their necks for a glimpse of what is about to unfold. For them, this is not simply a punishment. It is theater, a warning carved into flesh and memory. They whisper the name of the man who has defied a king, a man whose courage ignited rebellion, William Wallace. To most, Wallace is remembered as a fierce Scottish warrior, immortalized in legends and later romanticized in tales of bravery. The official narrative paints him as a traitor to the English crown, a man who challenged authority and paid the ultimate price. His execution, they claim, was the rightful end for one who rebelled against his sovereign. But hidden behind the official accounts lies a darker truth, one far more disturbing than schoolbook summaries or patriotic ballads. His death was not a simple execution. It was a carefully staged spectacle of horror, designed to shatter the spirit of a nation. What happened to Wallace was more than justice. It was cruelty elevated to ceremony, a public performance meant to erase not just his body, but his legacy, and yet, centuries later, the truth still lingers in fragments, in whispers of witnesses, in accounts buried by time, and in the chilling memory of a man who endured one of history's most terrifying ends. Long before his name became a rallying cry, William Wallace was born into a Scotland drowning under the weight of English rule. The late 13th century was a time of turmoil, where nobles quarreled for power while common folk bore the brunt of heavy taxation and oppression. Wallace himself was not of royal blood. He was a minor noble's son, raised in the rugged landscapes of Scotland, where stone castles rose like defiant fists against the misty hills. As a child, Wallace would have heard endless tales of freedom, of warriors who refused to bow before invaders. His early years were marked by training in both sword and strategy, but also by the bitterness of witnessing his homeland slowly being strangled by King Edward I of England, a ruler remembered by history as Edward Longshanks, ruthless and unyielding. Unlike many nobles who sought compromise to maintain their wealth, Wallace carried a fire in his chest that could not be extinguished by bribes or titles. When English soldiers killed his wife, according to some chronicles, that fire erupted into full rebellion. Wallace's life transformed from that of a local knight into the figurehead of Scottish resistance. Symbolically, he became more than just a man. To the oppressed Scottish people, Wallace was freedom itself, tall, fearless, and unbreakable. His victories, such as the legendary Battle of Stirling Bridge, were not just military successes. They were acts of defiance that reminded the world that Scotland would not kneel so easily. But with defiance came consequences. Every triumph etched his name deeper into English hatred. For Edward Longshanks, Wallace was not simply a rebel. He was an insult to royal authority, a dangerous flame that had to be extinguished in the most brutal way possible. Captured in 1305 after years of rebellion, William Wallace was dragged in chains to London, the very heart of the empire he had defied. For the English crown, this was not simply about punishment. It was about making an example. The message was clear. No one defies Edward Longshanks and lives with dignity. From the moment he arrived, Wallace's suffering began. Shackled, starved, and jeered at by crowds, he was paraded like a wild beast through the streets of London. His towering frame, once a symbol of strength, was reduced to exhaustion, his skin burned by the iron restraints, his body bruised from endless beatings during transport. Chroniclers describe how the people spat and hurled insults, treating Scotland's hero as nothing more than a criminal. But the real horror began with his so-called trial. Wallace was denied any chance to defend himself. Branded a traitor to the crown, though he had never sworn loyalty to Edward, he stood silently, knowing the verdict had already been written. The court's decision was not justice. It was theater, carefully staged to humiliate Scotland through the body of its bravest warrior. Then came the sentence, the most brutal execution known in medieval England, hanged, drawn, and quartered. For Wallace, this was not death, but a journey into living nightmare. He was stripped and tied to a wooden hurdle, dragged through the filth of the city streets for all to see. Dust, blood, and the stench of waste clung to him as the jeering crowds followed. When the hanging began, it was not intended to kill. The rope tightened just enough to suffocate him, his vision blackening, his lungs burning. only for the executioners to cut him down and drag him back to consciousness. The cycle of torment was deliberate. His body convulsed, his mind reeled in waves of terror, yet death was kept out of reach. The air filled with the metallic scent of blood, the acrid stench of smoke, and the cries of a man being reduced from legend to spectacle. What Wallace endured was not merely execution, it was psychological warfare, a message carved into flesh and memory meant to haunt Scotland for generations. For centuries, the story of William Wallace's execution was told as a straightforward tale of justice by the English crown, a rebel leader captured, tried for treason, and punished according to the law. But beneath the official records lies a far darker and more disturbing reality, one that reveals how calculated cruelty was used not only to destroy a man, but to crush the spirit of an entire nation. Whispers from chroniclers who lived closer to Wallace's time speak of missing documents, silenced witnesses, and trial records that were deliberately erased or rewritten. Unlike most prisoners, Wallace was not allowed even the semblance of a fair defense. Some accounts suggest the verdict was prepared before he even entered the courtroom. The so-called trial was little more than a performance designed to justify an already determined fate. Hidden fragments of testimony hint that Wallace's punishment was designed in stages, with special emphasis on humiliation. Scholars point to inconsistencies in medieval records, as if details of the torture were too horrific or too politically dangerous to be written openly. One chilling rumor claims that Wallace's body was mutilated in ways that official scribes dared not describe, lest it reveal the crown's true level of brutality. And then there is the question of the missing relics. Wallace's head was said to be displayed on London Bridge, his limbs sent to distant cities as warnings. Yet some reports suggest the remains were tampered with, hidden, or even stolen by sympathizers. If true, it means England's attempt to erase his memory may have backfired, giving rise to legends that only grew stronger with time. The hidden truth is this: Wallace's execution was not simply about ending his life. It was a carefully orchestrated spectacle of terror. Every scream, every drop of blood, was meant to echo through Scotland, silencing rebellion before it could rise again. But in trying to erase him, they may have created something far more dangerous, a martyr whose story would never die. The execution of William Wallace was not just the end of one man's life. It was the spark that set centuries of resistance aflame. To the English crown, his death was supposed to be a warning, a brutal example of what awaited anyone who dared to defy their rule. But history does not always bend to the will of kings. Instead of silencing the Scots, Wallace's horrific execution became the rallying cry for freedom. In the immediate years that followed, stories of Wallace's courage spread like wildfire. Minstrels sang ballads of his defiance, painting him not as a defeated rebel, but as a hero who stood unflinching before the might of an empire. These tales passed from village to village, from hearth to battlefield, keeping alive the idea that Scotland's spirit could not be broken by the sword or the scaffold. Politically, the Crown's decision to execute Wallace with such cruelty backfired. Instead of cowing the Scots into submission, it deepened the resentment against English rule. Leaders like Robert the Bruce would later draw strength from Wallace's example, knowing that his death had already laid the groundwork for continued resistance. The very brutality meant to instill fear gave birth to renewed determination. Over the centuries, Wallace's name became more than just history. It became legend. His story shaped national identity, fueling Scotland's long fight for independence and embedding the idea that freedom, once fought for, could never be fully extinguished. The gruesome execution meant to erase him only ensured that his memory endured, haunting his enemies and inspiring his people. The legacy of Wallace's death is this: empires may wield power, but they cannot kill an idea. And the idea of freedom, once lit, burns far brighter than any crown. As the years turned to centuries, the exact details of William Wallace's final moments blurred into legend. Some chroniclers wrote of his unwavering defiance, others of the horrific cruelty inflicted upon him. Yet even in the shadows of time, one truth remained. His death was never just an execution. It was a spectacle of power, a message written in blood meant to terrify all who dared to dream of freedom. But history carries a strange irony. What was meant to inspire fear instead became a haunting inspiration. Every detail of his torment whispered across the generations, chains rattling in silence, the roar of a crowd watching, the cold steel of executioners carrying out their grim task. And though his body was broken, his story refused to die. Even today, questions linger. Was Wallace betrayed by those closest to him? Or was his downfall the inevitable price of rebellion? Were the chronicles exaggerated to magnify his martyrdom, or were they hushed to hide truths too unbearable for the crown to admit? The line between history and myth is blurred, and perhaps that is why his story continues to disturb. Wallace's ghost does not rest easily. His execution remains an open wound in history, a reminder that justice and cruelty often share the same stage. And as long as people speak his name, his final moments echo like a warning. Power may destroy a body, but it cannot silence a legacy. And so, the terrifying truth behind William Wallace's execution is not just about the cruelty of one man's death. It is about the message kingdoms carved into history through fear. But here's the question: what do you believe? Was Wallace's death truly as horrifying as the records claim, or has time twisted the story into legend? Every detail, whether truth or myth, still shapes the way we see him. Not just as a rebel, but as a symbol of defiance that refused to be crushed. Now it's your turn. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Wallace's brutal end was exaggerated? Or have we only scratched the surface of what really happened? If you want more hidden truths and untold stories from history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and join me as we uncover the darkest secrets that the past tried to bury.